The restaurant was quiet except for the soft clinking of cutlery and the low hum of conversations. Alexander sat at the corner table, straightening his tie for the third time and checking his watch with a sigh. The candle flickered between them, but it was no match for the cold emptiness he felt inside. Tonight was supposed to be a blind date arranged by a colleague, someone he barely knew. Alexander had agreed more out of obligation than interest. He was a CEO, used to control, used to decisions that shaped companies and lives. But somehow he had no control over this small part of his life, and that thought irritated him. The table across from him remained empty, and the minutes stretched into an uncomfortable hour. He had ordered a glass of wine, but the taste was bitter in his mouth. He had imagined someone matching his world, polished, sophisticated, aware of the power and influence he carried. Instead, he was left with silence, the kind that made even a man used to attention feel small. Just as he was about to call it a night, the host approached with a polite smile and a slight bow. "Excuse me, sir. This table is reserved." Alexander looked up, frowning, ready to point out the obvious. He was the one waiting. But then he noticed the girl. She was small, dressed in simple clothes that had clearly seen better days. Her hands clutched a worn bag close to her chest, and she looked around nervously as though she were stepping into a world she did not belong to. Her eyes widened as they fell on him, and she hesitated almost apologetically before sitting down at the empty chair opposite him. Alexander's first reaction was irritation. How dare she sit at his table without asking? But there was something about her hesitation, the genuine fear and confusion that softened the edge of his anger. He studied her closely. She looked ordinary in every way, yet there was a spark in her eyes that seemed to challenge him silently. "I think there's been a mistake," he said finally, his voice calm but firm. The girl blinked, her lips parting in surprise. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I thought this table..." Alexander sighed, leaning back in his chair. There was a moment of silence filled only by the soft music playing in the background. Then, unexpectedly, he said, "Stay." The girl looked at him, puzzled. "Stay?" "Yes," he said, almost brusquely. "You may stay. I don't have anyone else waiting." She hesitated, then nodded quietly. It was a small gesture, but to Alexander it felt like a challenge. She was unafraid of him, or at least unaware of the weight he carried, and that was something he had not encountered in years. The waitress arrived, and the girl, clearly unfamiliar with fine dining, studied the menu with furrowed brows. She pointed to something simple, a modest choice that seemed far below the usual standards of the restaurant. Alexander found himself smiling, almost against his will. She was honest in a way that was refreshing. There were no pretenses, no attempt to impress, no hidden agenda. She was simply herself, and that was a rarity in his world. Conversation started awkwardly. He asked her name, and she replied softly, as if speaking too loudly might break the fragile world she had stepped into. Her name was Lila. He asked about her work, and she spoke about her days honestly, without embellishment. She worked multiple jobs, she said, struggling to support her family, yet she never complained. Her tone was calm, even when she described hardships that would have broken most people. Alexander listened, fascinated. He had spent years surrounded by people who flattered, lied, or chased power. Here was someone who had nothing, yet seemed to carry a dignity that made him uncomfortable in the best way. As the meal progressed, he noticed the small details that made her human and alive. The way her eyes lit up when she described helping her younger brother with homework. The way she laughed softly when she told a story about an awkward moment at work. Even the nervous way she held her fork made him aware of her vulnerability, and yet there was strength in it. He found himself sharing stories too, carefully at first but gradually opening up about his life, the stress of running a company, the isolation that came with wealth and power, the endless expectations that left little room for joy. Lila listened without judgment, nodding quietly, offering small comments that showed she understood even if she had never lived his life. Hours passed unnoticed. The restaurant emptied around them. The candle burned low, but neither of them seemed aware. Alexander, usually impatient and detached, felt a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Lila, who had only intended to eat quickly and leave, found herself drawn into the conversation, feeling safe in a way she rarely did. When the bill came, Lila reached for her bag, pulling out a few coins and some crumpled bills. Alexander stopped her gently. "It's my treat," he said simply. She hesitated, then allowed him to pay, a small smile breaking across her face. As they left the restaurant, Alexander held the door open for her. Outside, the city lights shimmered, and the cold wind contrasted sharply with the warmth of the evening they had shared. Lila thanked him softly, almost shyly, and turned to leave. He watched her walk away, feeling an unfamiliar tug in his chest. Something had shifted in him, something he could not name, but he knew he wanted to see her again. The chance encounter had begun as a mistake, a simple misunderstanding in a busy city, but it left both of them changed. Alexander returned to his empty apartment that night, not with the usual sense of control and satisfaction, but with thoughts of the girl who had unknowingly touched a part of him he had long ignored. Lila returned to her modest home, unaware of the impact she had made, yet carrying with her a small spark of hope that perhaps the world could be kinder than she had ever imagined. Neither of them realized it at the time, but this evening was the beginning of a connection that would challenge both their lives in ways neither could predict. A cold CEO used to controlling every aspect of his world, and a poor girl stumbling into a life far above her own, had collided. The effects of that collision were only just beginning, subtle and quiet, but powerful enough to start changing the course of both their lives forever. After their first unexpected meeting, Alexander couldn't stop thinking about Lila. Her presence lingered in his mind, an unexpected light in a life usually filled with meetings, numbers, and control. He returned to his office the next morning, staring out of the tall glass windows at the city below. Everything seemed different, smaller somehow, as if seeing her had shifted his perspective. The walls he had built around himself, layers of cold efficiency and careful detachment, felt suddenly fragile. Lila, on the other hand, returned to her modest home, unaware of the stir she had caused. Her world was practical, demanding, and full of responsibilities. She woke early, cooked for her family, cleaned, and prepared for her day at work. But her thoughts kept drifting back to the man she had met, the CEO in the restaurant. It wasn't attraction, not in the way people usually feel, but a fascination with someone so different from the world she knew, yet so attentive, so surprisingly human. A week passed. Alexander, unable to shake the memory, decided to see if he could meet her again. He found out through a few inquiries that she worked at a small shop in the city, selling basic goods. It was a humble place, far from the lavish offices and boardrooms he inhabited. When he arrived, Lila didn't recognize him at first. She was busy arranging items on the shelves, focused entirely on the task at hand. When she looked up and saw him, her eyes widened in surprise. "Mr. Alexander?" she said, hesitating. "Yes," he replied gently. "I hope it's not too strange for me to come here." Lila shook her head quickly. No, it's okay." Alexander smiled faintly. "I wanted to see you again, if you don't mind." She nodded, still unsure of what to make of the situation. He asked to help her for a while, just shadowing her, observing the daily rhythm of her life. She was hesitant at first, but gradually relaxed, sensing his genuine curiosity and respect for her world. There was no judgment, no condescension. Alexander listened as she described the long hours, the hard work, and the small joys of her day. The way she spoke about her family, her dreams, and even her fears touched something deep in him. They spent hours together, not in the luxury of a restaurant this time, but in the simplicity of her surroundings. Alexander found himself laughing at her stories, sometimes quiet laughter, sometimes soft chuckles that surprised him with their warmth. Lila, too, was beginning to feel comfortable, sensing that this man, so different from anyone she had ever known, truly cared to understand her. Over the next few weeks, they met several times. Alexander would find reasons to visit the shop, offering small gestures of help, lifting heavy boxes, arranging displays, listening. Each interaction was gentle, respectful, and human. He didn't offer her money outright or try to solve her problems with his wealth. Instead, he offered guidance, advice, and subtle support. He introduced her to people who could help her improve skills, but he did it quietly, without fanfare, so that Lila could maintain her dignity. Their conversations grew deeper. Lila would speak about her struggles, about the fear of not being enough, about the weight of responsibility she carried. Alexander shared stories from his childhood, his mistakes, his lonely moments, and the pressure of always needing to be strong. There was no pretense on either side, no need to impress. They were learning from each other, challenging each other. One afternoon, as they walked through a small park near the shop, Lila paused to watch a group of children playing. Her eyes were soft as she spoke about her brother, the way he struggled with school and how she tried to help him even when she was exhausted from work. Alexander listened, his usual sharp mind quiet, absorbed in her words. He realized how little he had appreciated the simple, everyday struggles of ordinary life, and how much he could learn from her humility, her resilience, and her kindness. There were moments of quiet silence, too, comfortable silences where words weren't necessary. They would sit on a park bench, watch people pass by, and feel connected simply by sharing space. For Alexander, these were rare moments of genuine peace, moments where he could forget the responsibilities that usually dominated his life. For Lila, these were moments of acceptance, moments where she could be herself without fear of judgment. One day, Alexander received troubling news at work. A major deal he had been counting on fell through, threatening significant losses. His first instinct was to retreat into his usual shell of control, to tighten his defenses and face the problem alone. But when he thought of Lila, her calm demeanor and the honesty with which she faced her own challenges, he realized he didn't have to face it alone. He called her, not to ask for help, but to talk, to share a part of his life he usually kept hidden. Lila listened, offering her thoughts carefully. She didn't pretend to understand the complexities of business, but she offered perspective that was grounded in reality and human experience. She reminded him that failures, setbacks, and challenges were part of life, and that strength wasn't just in controlling everything, but in adapting, learning, and accepting support from others. Her words, simple yet profound, stayed with him long after the call ended. This exchange began to change Alexander more than any business success or failure ever had. He started to see value in patience, empathy, and understanding. He began to notice the people around him in ways he never had before. The employees, the friends, even strangers on the street. He started small, offering encouragement, listening more and seeking genuine connections rather than superficial ones. Lila's influence was subtle but undeniable. Meanwhile, Lila faced her own struggles. She had to manage her family's needs, handle a difficult boss, and keep her life moving forward despite limited resources. Yet knowing Alexander cared, even in a simple, non-intrusive way, gave her strength. She began to dream a little bigger, think beyond immediate survival, and consider possibilities she had never allowed herself to imagine. She began to feel that her life could change not because someone powerful wanted to give her something, but because she had the ability to shape her own path with support and guidance. One rainy afternoon, Alexander found Lila struggling to carry heavy boxes of supplies into her shop. He stepped in without hesitation, helping her, and they laughed together at the absurdity of her trying to manage it alone. She looked at him, a mixture of gratitude and amusement on her face, and he realized how much these small human interactions meant to both of them. They were not grand gestures, not dramatic, but the simplicity of shared effort created a bond neither had anticipated. As time passed, their friendship deepened. Alexander began inviting Lila to events, but always in ways that respected her comfort and dignity. He didn't thrust her into his world of wealth and influence abruptly. Instead, he gently introduced her, explaining situations, helping her navigate social norms without embarrassment. Lila, in turn, remained grounded, honest, and herself. She never allowed the world she entered to change her fundamentally, and that authenticity continued to influence Alexander profoundly. Through these interactions, Alexander started to see his world differently. He began rethinking company policies, considering the impact on employees, and valuing honesty and effort over appearances and profit alone. Lila's perspective, born from struggle and simplicity, offered insights he had never considered. He realized that leadership wasn't just about power and control. It was about empathy, understanding, and the willingness to grow alongside others. Their story, though still in its early chapters, became one of mutual transformation. Alexander, the cold CEO, began to warm, learning to appreciate life's subtle beauty and the value of human connection. Lila, the poor girl who had stumbled into his world by mistake, discovered her own strength and influence, understanding that she could inspire change without losing herself. By the end of these weeks, Their bond was evident not only to them, but to those around them. There was a quiet acknowledgement, a shared understanding that their meeting was not accidental but meaningful. Their interactions were marked by patience, respect, and an ever-growing sense of possibility. The cold walls around Alexander's heart were beginning to crack, and Lila's confidence and hope were steadily rising. Both had started a journey of transformation that neither had anticipated, one that promised to continue reshaping their worlds in ways neither could yet imagine. The impact of their friendship was not dramatic or public. It was quiet, personal, and profound. It changed Alexander's approach to life, work, and relationships, and it gave Lila the courage to dream and grow despite her challenges. It was a story of two people from vastly different worlds finding common ground, learning from each other, and beginning a journey that neither had expected, but both needed. Their lives had collided in the most unexpected way, and in that collision, both had found a path toward change, understanding, and perhaps, in time, something even deeper. Weeks turned into months, and Alexander and Lila's friendship grew stronger with each passing day. The contrast between their lives became more apparent, yet it did not create distance. Instead, it drew them closer. Alexander found himself thinking constantly about her, not in a superficial way, but in a deep, reflective manner. Her perspective on life, her resilience, and her honesty had started to influence him profoundly. He was noticing things he had never paid attention to before. The effort of people around him, the small joys in simple moments, and the unspoken struggles that most ignored. Lila, meanwhile, continued her life with the same determination she had always had. She worked long hours, managed her family's needs, and faced daily challenges with a quiet strength. Yet her connection with Alexander had opened a small door of possibility. She had begun to think beyond mere survival, wondering if life could hold more than just struggles and responsibilities. She felt hopeful for the first time in years, though she guarded that hope carefully, unwilling to let it be fragile. One afternoon, Alexander decided to visit the local market where Lila often helped. He wanted to see her in her environment, to understand her world even more. As he approached, he noticed her moving between stalls, helping customers, carrying packages, and chatting warmly with people who recognized her. She seemed grounded and capable, radiating a quiet energy that made the chaos of the market manageable. When Lila saw him, she paused, a mixture of surprise and curiosity on her face. Alexander approached slowly, offering a gentle smile. She had grown used to his presence in her life, yet seeing him in this ordinary setting was unusual. It was a different side of him, one that did not belong to boardrooms or luxury. It was a part of him that sought connection without status or influence. "Alexander," she said, her voice cautious but friendly. "Yes," he replied softly. "I wanted to see how you manage everything here." They spent the day together in the market. Alexander observed her deftly handling responsibilities, helping customers and maintaining patience even when things went wrong. He realized that her life demanded a type of intelligence, adaptability, and strength that was rare in any environment, even among the most educated or affluent. He found himself admiring not just her resilience, but her humility and integrity. Lila, for her part, began to open up even more about her life. She spoke about the difficulties her family faced, the fears she carried, and the small victories that gave her courage. Alexander listened without judgment, absorbing every word. The more he learned, the more he recognized the stark contrast between his life of calculated control and her life of constant challenge. Yet he saw value in her perspective, a richness of experience that no wealth or power could provide. As they walked through the crowded streets, they discussed dreams, hopes, and fears. Alexander shared experiences from his youth, mistakes he had made, and moments of loneliness that had shaped him. Lila listened attentively, offering insights that were grounded in reality but carried wisdom beyond her years. She spoke about empathy, resilience, and the importance of staying true to oneself, even when circumstances were harsh. Her words were simple, yet they resonated deeply with Alexander. During their time together, Alexander began to see the limitations of his previous life. The cold efficiency and relentless focus on control had created success, but also isolation. Lila's presence reminded him that human connection, empathy, and kindness were equally important. He realized that his wealth and influence were meaningless if he could not appreciate and participate in the lives of others in a meaningful way. Lila also began to see changes in Alexander. He was more patient, attentive, and willing to engage without judgment. He listened without trying to dominate conversations, and he asked questions that reflected genuine curiosity rather than superficial interest. These subtle changes created a sense of trust between them, allowing both to be more open, vulnerable, and authentic. One evening, Alexander invited Lila to a small gathering of friends, not in a luxurious setting, but in a modest space where conversation and interaction were prioritized over appearances. Lila hesitated initially, uncertain if she could fit into a world so different from her own. Alexander reassured her, emphasizing that this was not about impressing anyone but about sharing time and experiences. At the gathering, Lila's honesty and warmth stood out. She engaged with people naturally, listened attentively, and shared her thoughts with confidence. Alexander noticed how her presence subtly changed the dynamics of the room. People accustomed to his status and influence were drawn to her authenticity. Her perspective, grounded in real-life struggle and resilience, challenged the assumptions and biases of those around her. The encounter also brought challenges. Some of Alexander's acquaintances were skeptical of Lila, questioning her background and her place in his world. Rumors and whispers surfaced, testing their bond. Lila, however, remained composed. She refused to let external judgment affect her dignity or her connection with Alexander. Her resilience, integrity, and clarity of purpose impressed him even more, reinforcing his belief in her character. As time went on, their friendship deepened further. Alexander began involving Lila in his work in subtle ways, seeking her opinion on matters that required empathy, fairness, and understanding of human behavior. He recognized that her insights, though not shaped by corporate experience, were valuable precisely because they were honest and grounded. Lila, in turn, gained confidence and a sense of purpose. She realized that her voice, her perspective, and her actions could have a meaningful impact, even in a world far removed from her own. They also faced personal challenges together. Alexander's demanding career sometimes clashed with their interactions, creating moments of tension and frustration. Lila, too, had responsibilities and obligations that limited her availability. Yet they navigated these challenges with patience, understanding, and communication. Each obstacle they overcame strengthened their bond, teaching them resilience, compromise, and the importance of supporting each other. Through their interactions, Alexander began implementing changes in his professional life as well. He started considering the well-being of employees, promoting fairness and valuing effort over mere results. Lila's influence encouraged him to think beyond profit and efficiency, fostering a culture of empathy and humanity within his organization. His colleagues noticed a shift in his demeanor. He was more approachable, attentive, and considerate. While some were skeptical, others appreciated the positive change, and Alexander felt a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. Meanwhile, Lila continued to grow in confidence and vision. She began exploring new opportunities, pursuing personal development and considering ways to make a broader impact. She did not rely on Alexander for guidance or support. Rather, his presence and belief in her potential acted as a catalyst for her own growth. She learned to balance ambition with humility, independence with collaboration, and resilience with vulnerability. Their bond, though deeply personal, also started influencing the people around them. Colleagues, friends, and acquaintances began to notice the subtle shifts in Alexander's behavior, the way he engaged with others, and the newfound warmth in his interactions. Lila's authenticity and grounded perspective inspired those who met her, demonstrating that strength, integrity, and empathy could transcend social status and wealth. One particularly rainy afternoon, Alexander and Lila found themselves walking through the streets, sharing stories and laughter as they navigated puddles and umbrellas. The rain did not dampen their spirits. Instead, it highlighted the simplicity and joy of being present together, without the trappings of wealth, power, or societal expectations. Alexander realized that these moments, small and unassuming, carried more significance than any boardroom meeting or corporate decision. As the months passed, the world around them continued its relentless pace, but Alexander and Lila maintained a connection that was authentic, supportive, and transformative. They learned from each other, challenged each other, and grew together. Alexander's cold, controlled world was beginning to thaw, reshaped by the warmth, resilience, and humanity of Lila's presence. Lila's life, shaped by struggle and responsibility, was gaining new possibilities, fueled by the confidence and perspective she discovered through their bond. Their journey was far from simple or easy. Misunderstandings, external pressures, and internal conflicts arose, testing their patience, trust, and commitment. Yet each challenge reinforced the lessons they were learning: the value of empathy, the importance of authenticity, and the transformative power of human connection. By the end of this period, it was clear that their lives had collided in a way that would have lasting impact. Alexander, once isolated and cold, was becoming more open, compassionate, and aware of the human dimension of his actions. Lila, once focused solely on survival and responsibility, was discovering her potential, her voice, and her ability to inspire change. Their worlds, though still very different, had begun to merge in subtle and profound ways, setting the stage for further transformation, challenges, and growth that neither could have anticipated. Alexander's life was slowly transforming, though he often did not notice the full extent of the change. Lila's presence had brought warmth, humility, and insight into his world, reshaping the way he saw people, work, and himself. He no longer approached life with the cold, calculated efficiency that had defined him for years. Instead, he was learning to pause, reflect, and value human connection. Lila, in turn, was becoming more confident in her ability to navigate the world around her. Though she still faced daily struggles and responsibilities, she carried herself with a quiet assurance that had been absent before. Alexander's support was not about giving her wealth or influence. It was about believing in her potential, helping her recognize her strengths, and providing subtle guidance when needed. It was this balance of respect and encouragement that helped her grow without losing her sense of self. One afternoon, Alexander invited Lila to visit a project he had started to help underprivileged communities. He wanted her to see how her influence was already creating change beyond their personal interactions. At first, Lila was hesitant. She feared being out of place among people accustomed to wealth and planning. Alexander reassured her that she would not be judged, that her voice and perspective were important. Reluctantly, she agreed. When they arrived, Lila's eyes widened at the scale of the project. Children played in areas designed to provide safety and education. Families received assistance that allowed them to build stability and hope. Lila felt a mixture of awe and humility, realizing the impact that careful planning and resources could have when combined with genuine care. Alexander watched her quietly, noting the sincerity in her reactions, the way she smiled at the children, and the thoughtful questions she asked about the project's goals and challenges. Over the weeks, Lila became more involved in Alexander's initiatives. Not as a figurehead, but as a collaborator. She offered practical insights based on her own experiences and the struggles she had faced. Her suggestions were simple but effective, often highlighting overlooked needs or subtle ways to improve processes. Alexander was amazed at how someone from such a different world could offer perspectives that were so meaningful and human-focused. As they worked together, Alexander noticed changes in his own behavior and mindset. He was more patient with colleagues, more willing to listen, and more considerate of the impact his decisions had on others. Lila's influence had made him aware of the human dimension of leadership, and he began to prioritize empathy alongside efficiency. He realized that true leadership was not about control or status, but about understanding, guiding, and inspiring others. Lila also faced personal challenges as her involvement grew. Some people were skeptical of her contributions, questioning her background and her ability to participate meaningfully. She encountered judgment, whispers, and moments of doubt, yet she remained grounded, relying on her integrity and the quiet strength she had cultivated over years of struggle. Alexander's presence provided support, but he never overstepped or intervened in a way that compromised her autonomy. Instead, he encouraged her to trust herself and her instincts. Their collaboration began to influence the broader community. People started noticing the changes in Alexander, the way he engaged with employees, community members, and stakeholders. He was no longer the distant, cold figure they had known. He was approachable, considerate, and genuinely invested in the well-being of others. Lila's authenticity and resilience became a model for others as well. inspiring those who met her to act with integrity and empathy in their own lives. As their bond strengthened, Alexander found himself reflecting on his past relationships and experiences. He realized that his previous life had been shaped by appearances, control, and status, often at the expense of genuine connection. Lila had shown him that authenticity, humility, and empathy were more powerful than any social or financial advantage. He began to reassess not only his personal relationships, but also his approach to business, leadership, and community engagement. One evening, as they walked together after a day of work at the project site, Alexander and Lila discussed their hopes and fears. Lila spoke about her desire to continue helping her family and community while pursuing personal growth and opportunities. Alexander shared his aspirations to create meaningful change beyond the confines of his corporate world. The conversation was deep, reflective, and unguarded. They discovered common ground in their desire to make a difference, to leave a positive mark on the world, and to support those who were often overlooked. Through these discussions, they encountered challenges that tested their patience and commitment. Alexander faced pressure from colleagues and stakeholders who were wary of the changes he was implementing. Lila dealt with skepticism from peers and community members who questioned her place in these initiatives. Together, they navigated these challenges with honesty, respect, and careful planning, learning to rely on each other's strengths while maintaining independence and dignity. Their partnership began to extend beyond professional or community projects. Alexander introduced Lila to small social events where she could interact with people from various walks of life. She was cautious initially, concerned about fitting in, but Alexander reassured her that her presence was valued for who she was, not for what she represented. Gradually, Lila became more confident, speaking openly, contributing ideas, and forming genuine connections with those she met. Meanwhile, Alexander's transformation was evident in his personal life as well. He began to spend more time with family and friends, engaging in conversations that went beyond work or status. He listened more, shared more, and allowed himself to be vulnerable in ways he had never done before. Lila's influence had opened his heart to the importance of relationships, empathy, and personal growth. He realized that success was incomplete without human connection, and that fulfillment came not only from achievement, but from the positive impact one could have on others. One day, a crisis emerged in one of Alexander's projects. A miscalculation threatened to undermine months of planning and effort. He felt the familiar weight of responsibility and the instinct to take control alone. Yet, when he thought of Lila, her calm and rational approach to problems, he realized that collaboration, empathy, and trust could be just as powerful as authority and control. He reached out to her for perspective, not because he needed direction, but because her insights were grounded in human experience and practical wisdom. Lila analyzed the situation carefully, offering solutions that were simple, effective, and considerate of all involved. Her suggestions helped Alexander navigate the crisis without compromising integrity or fairness. The experience reinforced the value of their partnership, demonstrating that genuine collaboration could produce outcomes far better than any top-down directive. As the months progressed, their influence on each other and those around them continued to grow. Alexander became more thoughtful, empathetic, and willing to consider perspectives beyond his own. Lila became more confident, resilient, and capable of navigating complex social and professional environments without losing her authenticity. Together, they were reshaping not only their lives but also the lives of those they touched. Despite these successes, they faced moments of doubt, tension, and fear. Alexander occasionally struggled with the expectations of his previous world, feeling pressure to revert to old patterns. Lila sometimes questioned whether she belonged in these new spaces, fearing judgment or misunderstanding. Yet they navigated these moments with patience, open communication, and mutual respect. Each challenge strengthened their bond and reinforced the lessons they were learning about trust, empathy, and the importance of authentic connection. One evening, as they sat together in quiet reflection, Alexander realized how much Lila had changed him. He was no longer the cold, isolated CEO he had once been. He was more connected, more aware, and more capable of understanding the human dimension of life and leadership. Lila, in turn, recognized the growth in herself, the confidence to speak, the courage to act, and the ability to influence positive change without compromising her values. Their journey was far from over. Challenges, opportunities, and transformations awaited them, but they faced the future with a shared understanding, trust, and commitment. The walls that had once separated their worlds were breaking down, replaced by bridges of respect, empathy, and collaboration. Together they were learning to navigate life in a way that honored both their differences and their shared humanity. Each day, each interaction, and each challenge continued to shape them, preparing the ground for the lasting change they were destined to create. Both individually and together, time had passed, and the bond between Alexander and Lila had grown into something extraordinary, though neither of them used words to define it. Their relationship was grounded in respect, trust, and the subtle understanding that had developed over months of shared experiences. Alexander's world, once rigid and cold, had warmed. Lila's world, once focused solely on survival, had begun to expand, filled with hope and possibility. Alexander's business decisions were no longer purely transactional. He considered the people affected by each choice, evaluating the impact on employees, communities, and families. He implemented programs to support education, healthcare, and fair work conditions, inspired by Lila's insights and real-life experiences. His colleagues noticed the change. He was still decisive, but now his leadership carried empathy, integrity, and patience. The company culture began to shift subtly, becoming more humane and inclusive. Lila continued her growth quietly but steadily. She embraced new opportunities that allowed her to expand her influence without losing her authenticity. She started mentoring young people in her community, helping them navigate challenges she had once faced. She found strength in the knowledge that her voice mattered, that her perspective could inspire meaningful change. Alexander admired her from afar, proud of her achievements, but he never attempted to overshadow her efforts. Their dynamic remained balanced, built on mutual respect rather than dependency. The world around them began to notice their impact. Alexander's philanthropic efforts grew more effective, guided by Lila's practical understanding of everyday struggles. Communities began to see tangible improvements. Schools became better equipped. Families received support, and people started to feel valued and heard. Alexander's reputation shifted from a distant, powerful CEO to a leader who genuinely cared. Lila's quiet, consistent work transformed lives without fanfare, her humility making her influence all the more profound. There were moments of personal reflection, too. Alexander often thought about the loneliness that had marked his early years as a CEO. He realized that wealth and influence could never replace the warmth of genuine human connection. Lila's presence had opened a door he didn't know existed, a door to understanding, empathy, and shared humanity. He appreciated her not just for her influence on his life, but for the clarity she brought to his understanding of what truly mattered. Lila, too, reflected on the transformation in herself. She had faced countless challenges, yet through her connection with Alexander, she had discovered new resilience and purpose. She no longer saw her circumstances as insurmountable barriers, but as opportunities to grow, help others, and make a difference. She realized that strength and compassion were not mutually exclusive. They could coexist and even amplify one another. One evening, Alexander invited Lila to a small celebration in one of the communities they had helped. It was modest, intimate, filled with people who had directly benefited from their efforts. Children laughed as they ran around. Families shared stories of improvement, and the atmosphere was warm and genuine. Lila watched quietly, humbled by the impact of their collective efforts. Alexander stood beside her, quietly proud of the way she had influenced his life and the lives of others. During the event, a young girl approached Lila, holding a handmade card. The girl's eyes were bright with excitement and gratitude. She explained how Lila's mentoring had helped her feel confident, work hard in school, and dream bigger. Lila knelt down, tears in her eyes, and thanked the girl, realizing in that moment the profound effect she could have on the world. Alexander watched silently, his heart full, understanding that Lila's authenticity and compassion had created change far beyond what he could have imagined. The evening was not without reflection on the challenges they had faced. Skepticism, judgment, and social pressure had tested them both. Alexander remembered moments when colleagues doubted his intentions or questioned Lila's place in his life. Lila remembered the times she wondered if she could belong in spaces so different from her own experience. Together, they had navigated these challenges with patience, trust, and integrity. The outcome was a partnership that was strong, balanced, and deeply meaningful. As the celebration concluded, Alexander and Lila walked through the quiet streets, reflecting on the journey they had shared. The city lights shimmered and the night air was calm, carrying a sense of completion yet also anticipation. They spoke of future projects, continued community work, and the importance of maintaining authenticity in everything they did. There was no need for grand declarations. Their actions, their shared history, and their mutual respect said more than words ever could. In private moments, Alexander expressed gratitude, not in a formal or dramatic way, but simply quietly. He thanked Lila for showing him a perspective he had never known, for helping him rediscover the value of human connection, and for being a constant source of inspiration. Lila, in turn, expressed gratitude for his belief in her potential, for the opportunities to grow, and for the trust and respect he had shown throughout their journey. Their story, though personal, had a ripple effect. Employees, community members, and friends began to emulate the values they had demonstrated: empathy, patience, humility, and respect. Alexander's company became a model for responsible leadership, blending professional excellence with human-centered principles. Lila's influence inspired others to believe in their ability to make a difference, no matter the limitations of their circumstances. There were small, quiet celebrations too: shared laughter over simple meals, conversations in parks, and moments of reflection on benches by the river. These moments were unassuming, yet they were powerful in their consistency and authenticity. They reinforced the bond between Alexander and Lila, reminding them that real change often occurs in quiet, steady ways rather than through grand gestures. Over time, Alexander began to understand that wealth and status were not what defined a meaningful life. Instead, it was the ability to touch lives, to inspire change, and to nurture genuine connections that mattered most. Lila's influence had reshaped not only his approach to leadership, but also his understanding of purpose and fulfillment. He had learned that success was incomplete without compassion, and influence was meaningless without responsibility. Lila, on the other hand, had gained confidence and clarity. She realized that her life was not defined solely by struggle or limitations, but by her capacity to act, to inspire, and to remain true to herself. She saw that her experiences, though challenging, had equipped her with unique insights that could bring real change. Through Alexander's support and their shared journey, she understood that strength and humility could coexist, creating a powerful force for good. As their story drew toward a significant stage of conclusion, they both understood that their bond had transcended simple friendship or collaboration. It had become a partnership of shared values, mutual growth, and unwavering respect. Each had reshaped the other's world in ways that were profound and lasting. Alexander's heart was warmer, his perspective broader, and his life more fulfilling. Lila's confidence had grown, her voice had strengthened, and her impact on the world had multiplied. The city continued to bustle around them, unaware of the quiet transformation taking place between two individuals who had come from very different worlds. Yet the ripple effect of their connection was visible in communities, workplaces, and personal relationships. It was subtle, human-centered, and enduring. Finally, one evening, they stood together on a balcony overlooking the city. The lights reflected on the river, and a soft breeze carried the distant sounds of life. They did not speak much, for words were unnecessary. Their journey, from a chance encounter in a restaurant to the shared impact on lives, had brought them here. They had learned, grown, and transformed together. Each had touched the other's heart in ways that could never be undone. In that quiet moment, they realized that life had more meaning than either had imagined. It was not defined by wealth, status, or control, but by the authenticity of actions, the sincerity of connections, and the courage to change and grow. They had discovered that true influence lay in empathy and integrity, and that love in its many forms, friendship, respect, shared purpose, could shape the world quietly yet profoundly. Their story did not end with grand declarations or dramatic events. Instead, it continued in daily actions, choices, and the steady commitment to make a difference. Alexander and Lila, though different in many ways, had created a shared path that was rich in meaning, humanity, and hope. The cold CEO and the humble, determined girl had found a way to change not only their own lives, but also the lives of countless others around them. Together, they faced the future with confidence, compassion, and unwavering respect. Their bond was a testament to the transformative power of empathy, authenticity, and shared humanity. They had discovered that even the smallest acts of kindness, understanding, and support could ripple outward, creating change far greater than either could have imagined alone. And in that discovery, both had found fulfillment, purpose, and a quiet, enduring joy that would continue to guide their lives forever. Months had passed since Alexander and Lila's lives had intertwined, and the depth of their bond had grown far beyond anything either had expected. Their journey together had transformed both their worlds quietly but profoundly. Alexander's once cold and calculated existence had blossomed into one rich with empathy, awareness, and human connection. Lila, who had faced countless challenges with courage, had discovered a newfound confidence and sense of purpose. Both understood that the impact they had made on each other's lives and on the people around them was profound and lasting. It was a crisp morning when Alexander decided to take Lila on a visit to a community project that had recently been expanded. The project was designed to provide educational resources and support to children from underprivileged neighborhoods. Lila had played a significant role in planning and organizing, offering insight into practical needs that Alexander, despite his resources, might have overlooked. As they arrived, children ran past them, laughing and carrying books and learning materials. Families gathered in small groups, chatting warmly with volunteers. Lila's eyes sparkled as she saw the changes she had helped implement. "It's amazing," she said softly, almost in disbelief. "I never imagined it would look like this." Alexander smiled, observing her reaction. "You made it happen, Lila. Your perspective was what we needed." She shook her head, humbled. "I didn't do it alone. You gave me a chance to be heard." Together, they walked through the project site, speaking with volunteers, parents, and children. Lila offered advice and guidance, ensuring that every detail was accounted for, from safety measures to educational resources. Alexander, meanwhile, interacted with everyone respectfully, demonstrating genuine interest and care. The combination of his resources and her practical wisdom made a powerful impact, one that was tangible in the gratitude and smiles of those they helped. After the project visit, they took a walk through the neighborhood surrounding the site. Alexander noticed the subtle ways Lila had connected with the people there. Her calm tone, her understanding of their struggles, and the way she listened without judgment. He realized how much he had learned from her, not just about practical matters, but about patience, empathy, and humility. In Lila, he had found a mirror reflecting the best aspects of humanity he had long overlooked. As they strolled along the quiet streets, a small crowd gathered near a community center. There was a commotion over a misunderstanding about resource distribution. People were frustrated, tensions rising. Without hesitation, Lila stepped forward, speaking calmly and clearly, resolving the conflict with practical solutions that addressed everyone's concerns. Alexander watched, impressed by her poise and ability to navigate difficult situations. Her actions reminded him that leadership was not about authority or dominance, but about listening, understanding, and acting with compassion. The incident reinforced Alexander's understanding of her value, not just as a partner in community work, but as a person whose integrity and strength could influence the world around her. He realized that true impact was not measured solely by wealth or position, but by the ability to inspire trust, empower others, and make thoughtful decisions that created positive change. Later that day, they sat together on a bench overlooking a small park. Children played nearby, their laughter mingling with the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Alexander reflected on the journey they had shared, from the chance encounter in the restaurant to the tangible changes they were now creating together. He thought about the cold, isolated man he had once been, and marveled at how much Lila had transformed his perspective. He had learned to value empathy, patience, and authenticity in ways he had never imagined possible. Lila, too, was thoughtful, reflecting on her own growth. She had learned to navigate spaces far removed from her previous experience, discovering confidence, resilience, and the ability to influence change without compromising her values. The partnership with Alexander had taught her that collaboration, Mutual respect and trust could create outcomes far greater than individual effort alone. She had grown, not because someone powerful had intervened, but because she had been empowered to recognize her own strength and potential. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the park, they spoke about the future. Alexander shared ideas,